college degree is oftentimes the first step to a successful career after graduation. Because of this, the college experience can also lead to personal fulfillment, being able to make an impact on society, and achieving financial wellness. Not everyone has access to the connections or insider knowledge necessary to prepare for an interview or to get feedback on a resume. This is why the Career and Internship Center exists. The Career and Internship Center helps students and alumni gain skills, experience, professional connections, and academic knowledge to pursue jobs, internships, and careers. We recently huddled up with career coach Dan Poux to break down the steps students should take during college to land that job after graduation. All right, we are here with Dan Poux from the Career and Internship Center. Dan, welcome to the podcast. We're really excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Carlos. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. Give us a quick introduction about yourself. Where, how long have you been at UW? What's your background?
Sure. Thank you so much. And again, my name is Dan Poux. My pronouns are he and him. I've lived in Seattle now for about 11 years, and I worked at UW for about 7 of those years. I actually grew up in Michigan, in Detroit, Michigan, and I went to the University of Michigan, which is in many ways really similar to UW. It's a big research university. It's always in the top 5 in terms of research funding, along with UW. Whereas U of M was in a really kind of quintessential Midwestern college town, UW has been so exciting for me to be a part of because it feels like such a distinct campus. You have such a really distinct campus experience there, whether you work there or whether you go there. And yet at the same time, you are an 8-minute light rail ride away from downtown Seattle and all of that things that has to offer. So in many ways, UW, I think, is got everything that the University of Michigan had and more. I came to UW from the Seattle Community Colleges, where I worked for about 5 years helping students to transfer into places like UW. And before that, I was working a lot in the nonprofit sector in Washington, D.C. before my wife and I moved here when she got a job at UW about 10 years ago. So for about 4 years, I worked in academic advising. And then I came across the atrium, as it were, in Mary Gates Hall into the Career Center about 4 years ago. And I've been working as a career coach in the Career Center ever since then.
Absolutely. It's been fun to be able to, I met you, Dan, when you were an advisor and we worked together in Mary Gates Hall. And when you moved over to the Career and Internship Center, you actually moved closer to my office. So I see you pretty often.
It's great to have you. And we'd love to hear a little bit about what the Career and Internship Center does to support our Husky success.
Happy to help with that. The Career Center is really 2 separate teams of staff. We've got 12 staff in our office. We're divided up into 2 teams. One is the team that I'm on, which is a team of career coaches who work directly with students one-on-one in small groups through workshops and webinars and seminars. And then we have a whole other team of staff in our office who are working on what we call the Employer and Community Connections team. And they're the ones who are really more employer-faced, helping to recruit employers for our career fairs, manage and organize internship opportunities, as well as information sessions that the employers themselves might be offering up to students who might be interested in exploring careers at their organization. So the staff has evolved and grown over time to help meet the need. And I think one of the things I think it's also really exciting is that we work really closely with our colleagues at UW Bothell and UW Tacoma, where they have their career advising is either housed within the academic advising space or it has its own office of career development, much like it has here at UW. But as Carlos and I were just talking about a minute ago, we work really closely with academic advisors. I think a helpful way to describe how we are different than academic advisors is that we really help students with all of the things that they're doing outside of the classroom, as well as picking a major, as well as figuring out what courses to take. We're working with them to help complement those experiences with internships, clubs, projects, undergraduate research, and volunteering in many cases to help them build the kinds of skills they need and to take career paths for a test drive, because we feel like that's going to be a really great way to complement what they're doing inside the classroom.
I think that synthesis between working with the advising and the fact that you had experience doing kind of traveling both lanes, do you notice that that's something that is kind of organic here at UW, or is that something kind of distinctly UW, or have you noticed larger mega universities doing something kind of similar? Because I feel like that connection between advising and career coaching there seems to be no daylight there. Whereas before, in my generation, I don't think that they were as integrated in the work that they did in supporting students.
I think we've definitely gotten really good at trying to make that handoff feel as seamless as possible. A lot of that is just relationship building. A lot of that is just the fact that I've been working with advisors in UAA, in the Office of Minority Affairs and Diversity, as well as in the departments, in the majors at UW for a long time. And so people feel very comfortable, I think, referring students to me and my colleagues in the Career Center. And as you know, it really helps when you can say, go see Eli in the Career Center, as opposed to saying, just go to the Career Center. If you can give them a name or someone to go to. So that's, I think, been a part of it. But I think you're absolutely right. This is especially true in the space that I've worked in a lot in, which is with supporting students in along the way towards careers in the health professions. So at some schools, at some universities, that work lives in academic advising. At other universities, that work has its own entire office very distinct from and apart from academic advising. And I think at UW, we're a bit of a hybrid where we work closely with advisors, but as I said, we really focus on helping them get those experiences outside the classroom in terms of leadership and clinical exposure and research that are going to help them complement their coursework.
Well, then it also sounds that, you mentioned this other arm that works specifically with industry leaders and companies, right? So being able to have access to those connections, especially in Seattle, especially in the Pacific Northwest, for students to be able to have access to internships and jobs, that just seems like it's such a great setup.
Absolutely. We really, one great example of how we work together in that area, Carlos, is around helping students assess an employer's commitment to creating inclusive workspaces. So for example, we as coaches have workshops and webinars where we talk with students about how to research an organization to find out if it shares their values and how to talk to alumni. But as part of that workshop, we also acknowledge and want to emphasize that our employer connections team is working really hard on that very same set of issues with employers. So for example, they're developing an inclusive hiring toolkit, an inclusive onboarding best practices for the employers that we engage with. So it's really important to let students know that we're not expecting them to do all the heavy lifting in that regard. Our employer connections team is also really engaged in that.
Yeah, that is, I honestly didn't even realize that you are providing services to employers as well as students, which just seems to be like a great comprehensive way of approaching it. I know that, the Career Internship Center has evolved over the course of the last few years. I think even just, the focus on career coaching and just some new systems that you have. Can you talk a little bit about how the program has evolved? How has the Career Internship Center really kind of adjusted to maybe even the pandemic? There's been a lot of changes over that course.
I think with the pandemic, what was so interesting about the way that the work changed, and I was talking about the two teams in our office earlier, for the coaches, it was relatively straightforward. We just went into a virtual setting. We changed the medium of the way that we interact with students, and that was it for the most part. We had to adjust how we offered drop-in services and that sort of thing. But our colleagues on the employer connections team had to really reinvent the way that they worked. And a good example of that is our career fairs. You may have attended one of our career fairs in the hub back in the day in the giant ballroom where it was kind of hot and sweaty and smelled kind of funky and it was noisy. And now those have gone away and have been replaced by virtual career fairs, which do have some limitations and do have some challenges for students. But we've also talked with lots of students who really didn't like the hot, sweaty hub ballroom approach to career fairs. And so this actually works much better for them. So I think that's a great example because all of the feedback that we're hearing from employers is that they love virtual fairs. Virtual fairs are really effective for them from a cost perspective, as well as from a convenience perspective, as well as an efficiency sense. So we think that virtual fairs are going to be the norm moving forward. We're probably going to still offer up some smaller niche career fairs that are focused on particular industries, but that's one thing that's really changed and is not really going back to the in-person with the way that it used to.
That's an interesting kind of it might seem a bit more intimate. Maybe that's because you are able to kind of have no distractions. It's just you and the screen. And I think that might suit a lot of conversations very well.
So it's interesting. So whereas in the past you might have had a 5-minute interaction with a recruiter and there's a long line of students standing behind you, so you're feeling rushed. Now it's a 10-minute one-on-one, which has actually become like the interview before the interview. So we're really encouraging students to do their homework, to come to those one-on-ones, with some good questions and a good sense of how to describe themselves, so that they can make it on to the next step. So that we feel like the stakes in a way have been raised. But to your point, Jenna, we've also found that students of color, as well as students who may be neurodiverse, find this to be a much less intimidating environment for them. And so we found that their participation has actually increased as a result of going to virtual fairs. And so I always try to keep them in mind, as well as the students who might be struggling to connect in a virtual environment, because it's not one student experience is not true across the board.
Since we are talking about virtually, when do you see students in person? I just wanted to just take the time. Mary Gates Hall is where our Career and Internship Center. That's the hub, so so to speak, of their work. And our academic advisors are also in the same building. So there's again the daylight. They are across each other. They're very close to each other, but there's also a lot of students within Mary Gates Hall, and love to hear when do you usually see them?
Sure. So as a team of coaches, right now we've got 4 coaches on our team. We probably see between 30 and 40 students a week. I would say that's probably on the high side. During the busy times of the year, we are seeing students in half-hour long one-on-one appointments throughout the course of the week. We also interact with students in small groups through workshops and webinars, some that are hosted in our office, others that are hosted out in departments that are asking us to come in and provide a requested workshop. And then we also offer a number of seminars throughout the course of the year on topics like career exploration. I've also managed a seminar for incoming students around exploring careers in the healthcare professions that's tied with a number of FIGs. And so we are seeing students in small groups, large groups, and one-on-one. But I think to your point, what we found is that even though we are offering up students in-person appointments every day, we're still seeing a lot of students opt for virtual appointments. And I think that's probably a reflection of the realization, like with many services, that there's a lot of things that you can accomplish virtually. One thing it's been great for is alumni being able to access our services, because a lot of them aren't in Seattle anymore and maybe are working a lot during the day. And so we've been able to make our services more accessible because we've continued to offer them up virtually.
Yeah, well, I think that's something really good to highlight, that you specifically are able to provide your services to former students. So students who have already graduated are able to take advantage of this as well. So you really provide those services across the board, from first year students all the way to students who have graduated. And it seems like you're also able to provide a variety of methods, right? One thing to highlight as well was you mentioned, being able to offer seminars. So a class that a student could actually register for that will really put them on a great path toward really understanding what their goals might be or what their interests might be. That's really awesome. Can you talk a little bit more about, like, as students are going through the process of utilizing Career and Internships Center services, I'd assume that as they're getting ready to graduate, that's really where you see a lot of students being able to take advantage of it. What sort of like specific approaches do you have for those upper class students?
Well, I think the first thing that we probably are going to be doing in that conversation is reassuring them that they're not too late to the party. I think a lot of times that's something that's keeping students from coming in because they feel like they haven't come in before. And I understand where that's coming from, but the point I think I'm trying to emphasize is that we will help them out wherever they find themselves. If they are at more of an exploratory stage where they're not really sure what to do with a major, or they're not even really sure what kind of major to pursue, we are happy to work with them around that. Again, from a career lens, which is going to be different than an academic advisor lens. We're going to talk more about what people with degrees in XYZ typically go on to do as a way to kind of sneak up on that question. But if they're coming in as a junior or a senior and they're feeling some chagrin about not taking advantage of our services before, we're just going to help them with wherever they're at, get to the next stage. So if they need to give their resume a refresh because they haven't used it in a while, we're going to start there. Or if they want to start tapping into that UW alumni network on a social networking platform like Husky Landing or LinkedIn, we're going to help them take that resume and then turn that into a social networking platform profile. So we'll help them get started if that's what they need, or we'll help them take it to the next level. And as you said, that includes them up till 3 years after they graduate, because we know how long this can sometimes take.
I like that. Honestly, I think that would, if I was a first year family member and I would hear that support is at least 7 years in, that feels, I just want to say that feels good, 7 years of support.
I think being able to know also, and I think you mentioned this, Dan, but your connections to departments, and I know you specifically have formalized connections to the College of Engineering as well as the Foster School of Business, because they also have their own career offices. Can you talk a little bit about like what is your connection? What is the main career center's connection to those department offices?
Yeah, you mentioned that there's sort of, we call them satellite career centers on campus. One is housed within the business school and the other is housed within the College of Engineering. And so those are really dedicated centers for people who are in those programs, in those majors, because they require, I think, a level of specification and specialization that the coaches in our office simply cannot provide, given that we're basically working with the other 35,000 students on campus, including graduate students. So we know a little bit about a lot of things. And I think for me, is what's been so helpful is to see how the work that we do in one space kind of transfers into another space. So for example, I mentioned a minute ago, we work with students on their resume or on a cover letter if they're applying for a job or an internship. But the same principles that we use when working with them on a cover letter, we would use when working on a personal statement for a scholarship or for a graduate program. So it's a lot of the same work, it's just showing up in different ways. For me, it's a lot of really helping students translate or transfer their skills from one setting to another. And that's something that a lot of students really struggle with. They feel like their work as a barista or their work as a lifeguard doesn't count when they're applying for a job or an internship. And so we spend a lot of our time helping them make it count by translating the way they talk about what they did in terms of using the language that employers are using in their job descriptions. So it's really sometimes easier to work backwards.
And that is really the difference between, maybe a student getting an opportunity for an internship and not. So I feel like, being able to take advantage of the services in the Career and Internship Center, I would say is pretty important for all students, right?
Yeah. We see a lot of students who come in and they might say, I've applied to 37 internships and I haven't heard back. And so when we start to unpack that, oftentimes they sent the same cover letter with very minor changes to all 37 employers. And so what we encourage them to do is to apply better to fewer opportunities. That seems kind of counterintuitive, but we feel like that's what's going to your point, make that resume and cover letter stand out in a crowded pool of applicants.
So when you, besides kind of clarifying please don't go through 37 internship applications, oh my gosh, when you meet with, let's just say, first year or second year students, very intrepid ones that are coming to see you their first year or first and second year, what type of questions do you usually get from those students versus when you're talking to juniors and seniors and maybe that panic is starting to set in? Yeah.
A lot of this has to do with whether or not they've gotten into a major yet, right? That really is what oftentimes focuses the conversation. So if they're coming in before getting in a major, they may want to know, they may want your help in sort of comparing and contrasting those majors and in terms of how those majors are going to lead towards various career paths. And the thing that makes that difficult is that for most career paths, there is not a strong link between the career and a major. There's only a couple of fields where that's really true. Nursing, civil engineering. If you want to work on a bridge, you have to have a degree in civil engineering. But for most career paths, people pursue them with lots of majors. So we try to help students not feel constrained by the major unless they want to use that as a constraint. Unless they want to say, show me the things that people with a biology degree typically do if they don't go to med school, for example. And then that's a way to kind of sneak up on that major question by looking at some big data from the Department of Labor around what people with biology degrees tend to do. So that can sometimes be helpful.
You mentioned medical school, right? And the university doesn't have a pre-med major, which is why, right, like then being able to connect with you in terms of students who are interested in going into health-related professions to really think about all of the different ways that they could approach applying to med school or applying to veterinary school or whatever that might be.
That's a great point too, Carlos. And just on that note, a lot of students assume you have to have a life science degree to go to medical school. And we spend a lot of time encouraging them to study whatever they want at the undergraduate level, keeping in mind how that might inform their future practice as a physician or a dentist or a pharmacist. So that's a great example where oftentimes the major does not matter as much as students think it does.
Yeah, a really good thing to think about, especially because I know that when we ask students if they're interested in pre-health professions, about a third of our incoming students tell us that they are. So that's pretty widespread.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you noticed any, and I'm going to speak to my humanities side. uh, you have a dedicated career internship services for engineering. You have one for foster. And there are lots of families whose Huskies might not know or might not have a certain direct path as of yet, right? They love everything or are interested in so many things. And how do you help with coaching appointments when you have this extremely wonderful human being who is just like, I like everything, but I don't know how to figure out a path, career path, grad path, medical school, law school. What does that sound? How do you meet a lot of students like that? And what does that what does that career coaching session sound like?
Well, and I think you really hit the nail on the head, Jenna, which a lot of students, I think, have a lot of things that they're interested in and a lot of things that they're good at. And I don't know about you, but I also have things that I'm good at that I'm not interested in, and I have things that I'm interested in that I'm not good at, right? So I try to help them, if they can make a Venn diagram in their head of like where these things overlap. Where's that sweet spot where the skills and the interests overlap? I don't use the word passion in my practice because I feel like it's a word that if for students who don't know what their passion is, they kind of feel like maybe there's something wrong with them, like they're like the Tin Man and the Wizard of Oz or something. So, but I ask them like, what kind of problems do you want to solve? They say, I want to help people. Well, who do you want to help? There's a lot of ways to help people. So we just try to start narrowing things down. And this really goes back to the idea of embracing constraints, which could include their values, in addition to their interests and their skills. It could include things like their workplace preferences. How do they want to show up and interact with their colleagues? That's something that a lot of students haven't thought about, especially if they haven't had the opportunity to work. So one great tool that I just want to give a shout out to is something that's called Pathway U. It's a series of surveys that we use for students, and these can also be accessed by people who aren't yet students at UW if you want to create a guest account. And I guess we can put a link to this into the notes after the session. But Pathway U is a set of assessments that takes about 45 minutes, and then it maps the students' responses to questions about their values and their interests and their personality and their workplace preferences to a giant database that's maintained by the Department of Labor, where they've asked the same questions of millions of workers and thousands of jobs. And so we can start looking at data and saying, well, there are a lot of things that, are a good fit, but then here are ones that look like a very good fit. And what students can do with that information is then compare it to other data from the Department of Labor in terms of how much money do people make in this field, in the state of Washington. It can get very specific. What's the outlook for the growth of this job over the course of the next decade? Is it growing at a higher than average rate or a lower than average rate? And then more importantly, for a lot of students, what level of education do I need? Do I need a graduate degree to pursue this field, or can I get a job in this field with just an undergraduate degree? So those three things right there can help them start to embrace some constraints around what is really important to them. And obviously students are looking for job security, and they're looking for to be able to support their family. And so you hear a lot of students talking about STEM. It's got to be STEM, because in their mind, STEM equals stability. And one thing that we do a lot with students is encourage them to dig deeper into that, because not all STEM degrees are created equal in terms of that. And there's also lots of other cool jobs that pay really well that don't require a STEM degree. So
That's great. I know one way that my office interacts with your office in many ways is utilizing a really great tool that called Handshake that really kind of gives students an opportunity to do some searches on jobs that are available, internships that are available. Can you talk a little bit about Handshake and kind of just the comprehensive ways that students can utilize that as a way to find positions?
Thank you for that shout out, Carlos. I would be remiss if I didn't put that in here. The Handshake is a one-stop shop for all things that are career related as far as our office is concerned. But to take a step back, Handshake is an online tool that's used by more than 1,000 universities across the US to post jobs and internships, as well as to manage their events, their career fairs. It's how students schedule appointments with me as a coach. So it's really something that they want to take advantage of, and they want to activate their Handshake profile pretty much as soon as they can, which is shortly after they register for fall classes in their first year. So the nice thing about Handshake is it's not just jobs around Seattle. You can imagine it's jobs all over the country and really all over the world, because there's more than 1,000 universities using it. The other great tool that's a part of that is that Handshake makes it very easy for students to connect with other students, either at UW or at other universities, who have Handshake profiles, who might have done, say, an internship last year that the student is interested in applying to. And so Handshake makes it really easy for students to connect with students who have worked at or who are working at employers that they're interested in. That is a great way to learn more about what that employer is like. And if a student wants to apply, that person, that connection is going to be a great person to tap into because whatever they did, it worked. They got the job. And so we really encourage students to use it as a tool to look for jobs and internships, but also look for people associated with those jobs and internships.
I guess this is the time where Carlos and I start asking about 4 things you'd like first year students and families to know more about your program. You've been so prolific in sharing, especially for Pathway, Handshake. Or what are other things, like 4 things, because we like fours, that you would like our families to know about your program?
I think another one that I would give a shout out to is a tool that we have called Level Up, which is a collection of the wisdom that we've gained from talking to employers across industries, across sectors. We've identified 9 traits, 9 skills that employers are looking for everywhere. And it's really about managing yourself. It's about interacting effectively with your coworkers, and it's about getting stuff done. And so what we encourage students to do is to think about what they've already done that shows those 9 skills. And again, make sure that that's coming through in their resume and in their Handshake profile. But then also it can be a planning tool for them in terms of how they want to build these skills during their time at UW. And so we include a list of, not a complete list of all the ways they can gain those skills outside of the classroom, including things like research, clubs, projects, volunteer work, study abroad. All of those things are ways they can complement the things that they're learning in the classroom that employers may be just as interested in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, Dan, I don't know if you know, but in first year programs, we've actually taken your Level Up competencies and really used those with our own student leaders as a way to really talk about their job in our office. And so really trying to align with all of that. So thank you all for providing that to us, because that just makes it really, really impactful, I think, in order for us to be able to have those conversations with our students. So we're utilizing your resources as well.
Thanks, Carlos. That's great. This is a really effective tool. Going back to something I said earlier about when students are struggling to translate what they learned as a hostess in a restaurant, right, or as someone who worked in retail. This tool can help them crystallize the kinds of translatable skills that employers are looking for, and that can be really helpful at moving them through that process too.
I hope that our families can use that too. That sounds like a great tool.
It is, and it's one of those things that's available on our website. You don't even have to be a UW student to use it. It's a fillable PDF, so if you want to, fill it out and print it out, you can do that. But I like to print stuff up and write all over it, and so if you want to do that, you can do that as well. We'll make sure we include a link to that resource in the notes as well. Just a quick shout out. One of the ways that because we know that UW is a really large university, and as I said earlier, I went to a large public university too, and I knew the importance of making it small, finding your community, finding your people. And so one of the ways that we in the Career Center support that is through our management of interest and identity communities. We have about 8 communities that are broken up by industry. So for example, I manage 2 of those. I manage the health interest community and the physical and life science interest community. We also have ones for media and marketing and gaming and technology and business. And those are a place where students can go to read articles about trends in that sector, as well as sector-specific resources like a list of hospitals to volunteer at. That's on our Health IC. We also have a group of identity communities for students of color, for students with disabilities, for international students, for example. And that's where we post resources that might be specific to students who are coming into UW sharing those identities. So one of those areas that I manage is the student identity committee for students with disabilities. And so we post resources there to help students navigate seeking out accommodations in the workplace, for example, which is a very different process than seeking out accommodations in a university. So that's one way that we also help to try to make UW smaller, especially for those incoming students, because we know how important that is.
I was just going to say, really even helping students discover the the careers that are out there now, I feel like there's this adage, right, that we always say is that, in the future we're going to be working in careers that don't even exist today. And so I'm sure you've seen a lot of these new careers pop up, especially as we are kind of in the middle of this tech industry in Seattle. What sort of new jobs or careers have really taken off since you started working with career coaching?
Sure. A couple of things come to mind. Obviously, a lot of it is driven at this point by COVID and how COVID is really changing the nature of work in so many industries. The rise of virtual employment, the rise of hybrid employment, that's going to be a trend that's not going to go away. And I think a lot of workers and a lot of students would probably agree that the prospect of a hybrid work situation or even an all virtual work situation may have a lot of attraction to it. So we're helping students identify that as part of their own values and their own workplace preferences, and also how they would demonstrate to an employer the kind of responsibility and accountability and follow through that is going to be required if they're going to be working in a remote location. So how to show that through a resume or through an interview is really one of the things that we're working on in that regard. Another thing is this so-called Fauci effect, where we've seen admissions to med schools, applications to med schools across the country go up by double digits. UW Med School had 18% more applications last year, and it's looking like it's going to be, again, a record year in terms of applications. So helping students, if they feel inspired, to figure out appropriate ways to channel that. So one of the things that I think will be interesting to watch, too, is to see if the number of public health degrees go up over time as well, because while Anthony Fauci is a doctor, he's also a public health professional. And so I think there's going to be an ongoing interest. And you mentioned how Seattle has really been the center of a lot of the response to COVID through UW, as well as through researchers working across town who are in conjunction with UW. And so there's a lot of really exciting work going on there. And then if you think about other sort of new careers that are emerging or have emerged, a lot of it has to do with how people interact with technology and how technology interacts with other technology, which is not surprising. One of the things, I read a lot of science fiction novels, so I'm always like really intrigued by how that's overlaying and how we're seeing things happening in real life. But one of the terms I heard at a career conference about 2 years ago, which really stuck with me, is this idea of cobots. So essentially, people who are working in close conjunction with a robot or with an artificial intelligence, and how in the future, workers who are going to be expected to work in close conjunction with AI or with robots are going to have a unique set of skills to be able to do that. So it's crazy to think about a coworker as a robot, but that's certainly something that we're seeing in response to COVID as well, is the acceleration of automation in many workplaces. And so I think it's really helpful for students to think about the future of the career that they might be interested in and how AI or how robots may affect the future of that career to ensure that that career is still around when they finish getting all the training that they're getting for it.
I'm happy for our robot friends. Come and hang out now. Dan, this has been such a great conversation and has been a lot of fun. And also, thank you for kind of setting us in the present and also in the future. It's very, very exciting to see how Career and Internship Center is kind of really in the middle of all of this really wonderful new things that are going on. And great to hear about how your work really impacts a lot of our students, especially within that career and major exploration space.
Yeah, that's. Thank you so much for having me. And this is all really exciting and interesting stuff. So I really appreciate being able to explore it with you.
The Husky Huddle Up podcast is a collaboration between the University of Washington first-year programs and parent and family programs to provide parents and families equitable access to information in support of their student success. The Husky Huddle Up is produced by me, Chloe Giselle, a senior in the UW Cinema and Media Studies program.